So it's not a big cake, but it's reasonable because it's quite a rich cake, so you don't really want big slices of this cake anyway. So the first thing is I'm using a spring form cake tin, 17 to 18 centimetres, and grease it lightly with a little bit of light olive oil, rapeseed oil or dairy-free spread. Then we're going to just literally make a mark on some grease-proof paper, and then we're going to cut out a circle. This will just make it a lot easier for us to get out of the cake tin once it has cooled. And obviously for the decorating, you are going to have to allow it to fully cool so that the marzipan won't start melting as you put it on. So I'm just using standard baking parchment, and then we're going to just place that in the base of your cake tin. Because this is a non-stick grease-proof baking parchment, I don't have to grease it again. It's not like a Christmas cake where you will have to obviously sometimes put a collar on the cake as well. It's not going to rise a huge amount. So that's the first thing. Your oven should be on, you should have greased and lined your cake tin. Now the next thing to do is, before we prepare the actual cake, is we just want to soak, just for a few minutes, our dried fruit. This will just mean it's slightly more moist as you cook it. So in the ingredients list, we had 200 grams of mixed dried fruit. This could be anything you like. And actually sometimes when I make a Christmas cake, I change a lot of these so it's more tropical. So things like papaya, mango, but just make sure those ones are not too hard. Sometimes they're a little bit hard. So I'm going to drop those into a glass bowl. And then I mentioned on the ingredients as well, just to give it a little bit of a more fruity texture and flavour, I've got here 50 grams of dried cranberries. It could be dried cherries, blueberries or anything like that as well. They tend to be a little bit more moist and plump. Now to plump them up and to add moisture to the cake, I've got here about 50 mils of apple juice, just pure apple juice. We're going to pour that over, and we are really just going to allow this for 5 minutes. It's not that you have to prepare this overnight at all. Now for some lovely sort of almost Christmas flavours but warming flavours, I've got here some cinnamon, and also I'm going to use some mixed spice as well. So depending on what you like, you could instead just add a few dashes of something like ground cloves or even nutmeg or something like that. Give it a little stir, and as we prepare the rest of the cake, that will just soak up really nicely, plump it up, and that will give it a slightly more moister texture as we cook the cake. Now of course you could have done that overnight, but there's really no real need. It's only a small amount of liquid. So just set that to one side. Now the next bit is the marzipan, because in a traditional Simnel cake, you actually have a layer of marzipan in the actual cake itself. So when it cooks, it sort of melts, and again, it gives the cake a really nice, moist texture. I'm just going to welcome everyone if you are watching live. I hope you're cooking along with us. If you're watching this as a recording, then I hope you will use this to make it yourself. So thank you everyone for joining us on your Saturday afternoon. We've just soaked our fruit. Now we're going to do the marzipan. Now with the marzipan, I have mentioned on the ingredients that you do need to check it's gluten-free and also vegan. The reason I say that is that some commercial marzipans will have egg white in there. So just check if you are vegan. Now of course you could make your own. It's a really easy recipe. It's literally 250 grams of ground almonds, 250 grams of a powdered sugar. Now that could be powdered erythritol. Sucrin are a good brand that sell that. It could be powdered up xylitol if you want a lower sugar version, or if you don't mind a bit of sugar, then you could use icing sugar of course, but it does need to be powdered. And then blitz that in a food processor. Add then about 2 teaspoons of lemon juice, and then some almond extract, really according to your flavour, and then a little bit of water to bind. And then you would have your own marzipan. Now I have bought, shop bought. Now for the 500 grams, remember, you're going to need a top layer to decorate and 11 balls. So you want to cut less than a half for the filling because you need a little bit more for the topping. So don't be over generous with the middle layer in the cake. Then you're going to use cling film to roll it out. This is by far the best thing to avoid clogging it up with flour or corn flour. And really the cling film would just mean that you can roll it out without it cracking and without it also getting dry. Don't store marzipan in the fridge. It's going to really dry out if you do that. So if you have leftover marzipan, simply wrap it in some cling or baking parchment and keep it in a cupboard. What I like to do sometimes is make little mini Simnel cakes or even brownies and just drop little pieces of leftover marzipan in them, and it gives it a really nice warm and also moist texture. So again, you're going to get the size of your cake tin for this. We want it to fit in the middle of this cake. So you just use that as a template, and then we are going to roll it out, and you want it to be probably about the thickness of a pound coin. So you don't want it to be really thick and cloyy, but you want enough flavour in there. So just very gently roll out your marzipan. With the cling film, you'll find that it will roll out very easily without really even sticking. And then from time to time, just place your cake tin on the top, and once you've got around about that size, then take off your first or your top layer of your cling film, and then just with a sharp knife you're going to cut, and then you can put that to one side. Again, wrap it in cling because you don't want it to dry out while you are actually making the cake. So I'm just cutting this, and then what I'm going to do is wrap it back up in the cling, ready for when the cake is going to be spooned into the cake tin. So very easy. And remember, leftovers, keep them, because one, you can use them for the little balls on the top, but also they are delicious added to other cakes or cupcakes or brownies. Now sometimes as well, and this is more of a Christmas thing of course, people like to add a little bit of almond paste into a medjool date, and that's a nice little sweet treat. You can also roll these into little Easter egg balls and then coat them in chocolate, and that would be a really nice way of perhaps using up some of the leftovers. If I didn't watch it, my children would probably just eat it without anything. So just keep it always wrapped up because you don't want it to dry out. So I'm just going to fold up my marzipan and then just leave that to one side. So if you are cooking with us, hopefully you're keeping up. We should have just made our marzipan middle layer. Our fruit is soaking. Now we're actually going to get on with the cake, and it is really quick. So you won't have much effort with this. And you can use a glass bowl. I'm going to bring over the food processor just for speed. So cake tin to one side. I'm just going to move my food processor just so that you will be able to see everything. So in the ingredients, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just cream, a bit like most cakes to be honest, a little bit of dairy-free spread. Now there's lots of spreads around. I like to try and get one that's either high in olive oil or high in coconut oil. And there's some really good brands out there. Suma, Biona, the organic ones are very good. You could use just organic coconut oil as well. So rather than some of the omega-3 spreads, sorry, the omega-6 spreads that are more sunflower based or soya based, obviously if you've got allergies then you might need to avoid certain things. Try and use something that's got a little bit more of the monounsaturated fats or the coconut oil, which is also a lovely creamy texture. So I'm adding that to my food processor. And again, if you are doing this by hand, just bring it out at room temperature. They tend to be quite soft anyway, but it would just make it much easier for you to cream with a wooden spoon. And then to keep the sugar down, I'm using xylitol. Again, you could use erythritol, you could use a granulated stevia. You would need probably only 1/3 if you're using stevia. It is incredibly sweet. So just be careful. If you are using stevia and it's a granulated one, just check the label. Sometimes it's actual sugar with stevia, so that won't necessarily be the healthier option you think it is. Now, the other sort of moist elements are some pure apricot spread. This is a apricot spread, just pure fruit, no sugars added. Obviously, of course, it's naturally quite sweet anyway, and that goes in. And then I mentioned on my recipe, I'm using baby apple puree. This may seem a little strange, but I use apple puree. So this is like a hip one. They come in either pouches, like the Ella's Kitchen, or they come in little tubs, and you can get a whole range of flavours. It doesn't have to be apple, but I think I want something that's fairly bland. I don't want something that's going to overpower the cake. So you'll need just one of these and probably a little bit more for 125 grams. Now, of course, if you've got time, you could make your own stewed apple. It might be a bit thicker, so you might then need to just add a little bit of extra apple juice. But I'll show you the texture of the cake, so please don't worry. That goes in. If you've got an allergy to apples, then clearly use a different fruit puree. Pear is also very good, it's quite bland. And again, you could just puree up your own. Really, what you're looking for is quite a moist, soft puree. So if you have allergies to those and perhaps you want to use a banana, that would be fine, but you might need a little bit more of apple juice just to make sure it's blending. So, lid on, and we're going to process this up so it's lovely and creamy. This will really just take a minute. Now, of course, don't worry at this stage if you look at it and you think, oh, it looks like it's splitting. It won't matter. By the time you've added the dry ingredients, it will all be blended nicely together. Now, of course, it's no eggs. And the reason we can get the eggs out is because that apple puree will help to bind it up. There are lots of ways of cooking without eggs, and I've got a whole blog on my website about egg-free baking. So please, if you're interested in how can I get eggs out of a cake, or you've got an allergy to cakes, it's actually really easy. And in something like this, a fruit puree is one of the best things. And also it means that you are providing extra fibre and natural sweetness without having to add lots of sugar. Now, I'm using Dove's Farm plain flour in this recipe. It's a really light flour, and I find it works really well in this cake. So I've got here 100 grams of Dove's Farm plain flour. And then, just to add a little bit of extra protein to the cake and more texture as well, I've got ground almonds. If you have an allergy to nuts, simply take it out, replace it with the Dove's Farm plain flour. It will work just as well. So you don't have to have nuts in this recipe. So that's 50 grams of ground almonds. Now, we want it to be a little bit light in texture. I mean, it is a fruit cake, so it is going to be quite a moist, dense cake anyway. But I've got here 1 tablespoon of gluten-free baking powder. We're going to blend that up first, and then we'll just pulse in that lovely dried fruit as well. And of course, you can do that by hand in a bowl. It really wouldn't take you that long. I'm just doing this for speed. And then your soaked dried fruit, which should really by now have absorbed most of that lovely apple juice, we're going to pour in. Now this time we don't really want to blitz up the food processor too much, because we want that nice texture of the dried fruit in here. We don't want it to be a puree or a mush. So I'm just going to quickly blitz it, just to make sure it's fully combined. And that's it. So that you don't need to do any more than that. Now, remember I said that this cake has a layer. So what you don't want to do is just immediately pour the whole lot of the batter into your cake tin. Remember, we're going to put in that lovely layer of marzipan as well. So let me just move this out of the way so that you can see exactly what I'm going to do. So I'll just take out my blade. And the nice thing as well, because it is a fruit cake, it will last. It won't last in my household, I'll be honest with you, but traditionally you could wrap it up, probably without decorating it. I wouldn't decorate it until you're ready to really serve it. But you could wrap it up for a couple of weeks if you want, in some baking parchment. So just half of the mixture now is going into your cake. So just spoon it in, and then remember what you want to be able to do is have a very flat surface, because we're going to place on the marzipan. So hopefully, if you are cooking along with us, you've got to this stage. So just with the back of a spoon, just smooth the top, and I'll just show you this in a minute, so that it is nice and even. What you sometimes will find as it cooks, sometimes a little bit of the marzipan will ooze out at the sides. That's absolutely fine. It just means it's really going to be lovely and moist. So there we are. That's half of the cake in there now. And then we're going to get our layer that we had already rolled out. And maybe it might be a good idea if we can get a close-up of this bit, just so that you can really see what we are doing. So you should have your circle of marzipan, and this is going to be placed in the center of the cake, so it's a lovely layer. So we're just going to put that in, just press down the edges so that you then can get a nice even layer when you put the rest of the cake mixture in, and then the rest of the cake mixture is spooned over the top. And again, you want to try and just, with the back of your spoon, just use the back of the spoon just to really get a nice even layer, so that when it cooks, we'll have a nice flat layer to then work with when we decorate the cake. So you see, this is going to be quite a rich cake with all that dried fruit in, and of course that marzipan. I mean, if you really want to just avoid it being so rich, just take out that layer of marzipan. But the whole idea of a Simnel cake is it's going to be rich. It's a celebratory cake for Easter. Okay, so once you've done that, it goes into your oven. You should have already preheated your oven at 140 degrees C. Now this is going to cook for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Now you might think that's a long time, but for fruit cakes, really it isn't. I don't normally need to cover it with foil. If halfway through or towards the end of cooking, you feel your cake is a little bit brown, just simply cover with some foil, just so that it's not quite as brown. But that's going in the oven, 140 degrees for 1 hour 40. Now when it's ready, you will need to then allow it to sit in the cake tin for about 10 minutes. That will just help you to then unmold it. It needs to be fully cold when you do the decorating, and that's what I'm going to show you now. So don't rush at this, because otherwise the marzipan is literally going to start melting on top of your cake. So you will need a little bit more of your apricot jam, because that's going to be our coating for the cake in order to stick on your marzipan. So you will have to probably just put it in a pan and melt it just on a low heat. So hopefully you will be able to watch this bit back while your cake is cooking, and then you know exactly what we're going to do. So just as the Blue Peter type of programs, I have made one in advance because I really want to show you this bit, because this is a really fun bit. You can get your children to do this as well. Now, just a little bit of background about the Simnel cake. It is a traditional Easter cake served by Christians, obviously, and they top it with little balls that are really to depict the disciples, but minus one, which is Judas. So you are going to be rolling out 11 balls. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to roll out another circle for our topping of the cake. Yeah, we could do a quick... Now, normally you would have your cake tin so that you would know how to cut it. I haven't, because obviously my cake is already in the oven. So I'm just going to very carefully roll it out to a sort of size that I think is appropriate. So again, you need cling film. So cling film is so good for rolling. When you're doing gluten-free pastry, that tends to be one of the best ways of rolling out gluten-free pastry, because otherwise it tends to go quite dry. So even if you are using gluten-free flour on your pastry, it will still dry out. So just again, roll it out, just as you did for that centre. And I'm actually going to place my cake on this just so that I can use it as my template. Now, for some people, I'm just going to bring up the cake that we've already done. I don't know if you can see, but with some people like it to sort of tip over the edge a bit more, in which case make the circle just slightly bigger. So if you want to have a bit more on the edge of your cake, just remember, because you can then crimp it, and that will mean that you can have a little bit of what we call an overhang, really. Again, we want it to be around about probably the thickness of a £1 coin. So I'm going to just put this on top. Chris, would you like to do a close-up, just so that people can see? Because otherwise I think it's going to be a little bit more tricky for people to see. Now, you wouldn't be doing this with your cake. You would actually do this with your cake tin. Now, I'm just going to mark it because I've actually got the cling film over this still, just because I don't want the cake to get all sticky with the marzipan. So again, just like you did for the centre of your cake, you're going to cut a circle that matches your cake. And then I'm just going to move my cake just here, and that way it's not going to be all crummy, this marzipan. Okay, so you'll then just cut out. Now again, if you wanted it to be a little bit bigger, then simply just perhaps use a side plate or something, or an 8cm or an 8-inch cake tin, 20cm cake tin, which would just be slightly bigger. Okay, so that's the first bit. Now, let me just get this back so that we can show you what we're now going to do. So now, if you found that when you took your cake out, the top was really uneven, or you just felt it wasn't quite as flat, you can just turn the cake over and decorate the bottom. No one's going to know. It won't make a scrap of difference. Now, to allow it to stick, I've got here on my pastry brush a little bit of warmed apricot jam. So this will really just help it to stick. And if you are doing it so that you're going to have a slight overhang, then just do the edges as well, like that. Marzipan is actually quite sticky anyway, to be quite honest, so you won't really need a lot of that. And you might just want to keep a little bit of apricot jam in your pan for the balls. So then we're going to place that over the top like that. Now, if you wanted to, just with your fingers, you can just crimp the edges like that. You could use a fork to do that, or you could just keep it flat. But I think actually it's quite nice to have that little crimping there as well. Okay, so that's your first bit. Now we've got the little disciples. Now I found for this cake, you want balls that aren't going to be too big. So this is where your ends of your almond paste is really handy. Now, if you want to make sure they're even, simply get your weighing scale and make sure that they're all the same size. Now, weight-wise, I have found for this type of size of cake, around about 12 to 13 grams, I know that's quite precise, of almond paste per ball is what you need. So you might just want to weigh out 11 little pieces of sort of 12, 13 grams of almond paste. Then in your hand, simply roll it together so you've got a nice smooth ball, just like that. So you need 11 of those. And again, you could do this in advance while your cake is cooking or cooling, and get them all the nice same size. Now, of course, it's not going to be quite even. So what I tend to do is just place them. I tend to do this first and then I make a little adjustments because you've got 11 here. So you are going to have to then gradually just move them around. It's not quite as easy as doing 12, obviously. And then get them in place so that you are happy with where they are placed. And take your time on this because you want it to look really nice. Now, you can just press them down, but what I sometimes like to do is just get your brush, it doesn't really have to have much on there, and just brush with a little bit more of that apricot paste, just so that they do stick, particularly if you've got young children that like to just pinch them off. So it just means that they're not going to roll off. So don't put loads on, because marzipan, if you've kept it nice and covered with your cling, to be honest with you, will stick quite well almost without that. Or you could just use a little bit of water. So just get those. Now you don't have to glaze it. Now again, traditionally, you would find that a lot of the cake recipes, if they weren't vegan, would say brush it with egg white. You don't need that at all because it's quite well, it's very sugary, almond paste. To get the nice brown texture, really, if you put it under the grill or you blowtorch, which I'm going to do in a minute, it will naturally caramelise anyway. So don't worry about, glazing it with anything. Some people like to sprinkle a little bit of icing sugar over it, which can be useful if you are putting it under the grill because the heat isn't quite as intense. Now, if you are wanting to do that glaze, then get your grill to really high. You need it really hot. If you are lucky to have a blowtorch, and I've just got mine from Lakeland, and they're really easy to use, then you can use a blowtorch, and I'll just show you that now. Obviously, be very careful if you've got children around, of course. Now, I don't like it to have too much of a flame because I don't want it to be completely burnt. So once you've got your flame on, just turn it down a notch, because otherwise it could really go quite dark straight away. And then hold it on top of each of, let's do a little close-up so you can see this. Hold it on top of each of your balls, and you really just want the very tops of the balls to just go golden. We don't want them brown and burnt, we just want them golden. So keep moving your blowtorch so that you're not going to necessarily cause one area to be really dark and the rest not. And I would say less is more, so don't go berserk. And obviously if you've got a teenager, you must supervise if you are allowing him to do this. And then often it's quite nice as well just to do a little bit in the middle. So again, take your time, don't rush at this because you don't want it to be really dark. You want it just to be a light golden. I prefer it to look like it's just had the top of the grill rather than been really whacked high. And then again, sometimes it's quite nice, can you see there, just to do the edges of the marzipan, just so you've got those nice little crimple bits that you may have done, and then it just gives it that really nice warming touch. Now if you wanted to, instead of the marzipan and balls, you could actually decorate with some edible flowers, marigolds or something like that. The peonies are really nice as well. But I think, you know, on its own, it looks really nice just the traditional way. I often, as you've seen in the first one, I will put often a flower in the middle, just to give it a really nice sort of design. Just really keep it quite simple. So let me just show you what it looks like now that we've done our cake, and I'll answer some questions as well. If there's any questions, please just post them. We've got someone here who can read them out to me, but I'll just cut a piece of the cake. And again, in terms of storage, I'll hold the cake slice up so that you can see it. But in terms of storage, I wouldn't necessarily put this in the fridge because you'll find it will just dry out. Just put it in an airtight container or a tin, and it will keep for a long period of time. I mean, at least a week. Not that I think it will last, probably more than a day, to be honest. Obviously, most people, especially children, will want a ball. So you can get at least 11 slices out of this. But remember, it is actually really rich. So let me just hold that up. So I'm hoping that you can see just probably in the middle, there is a nice sort of melted layer of almond paste. You may not have actually been able to see that. But Chris, if you could just do one close-up of the cake, and then I will take questions. And if you are watching this in your leisure, so hopefully you can see that, it's a really nice layer of marzipan in the middle. If you are doing catch-up, I hope you have found my demonstration really useful. Please remember to post any pictures of your own on our Facebook page. And of course, we're going to upload all this onto Facebook and of course our YouTube channel, which is just Christine Bailey in the Kitchen. So you can always watch it back again as well. And we're going to do a whole series of cook-alongs. They're all going to be obviously allergy-free, and a lot of them are going to be vegan as well. So we can always adjust the recipes to suit any of your allergies or your eating tastes. So I'm not sure if there are any questions. So Chris is going to read out some questions now.
Question from Karen, and it's really around the oven. So
Hi,
she wants to know whether your fan-assisted oven would impact the time, and also which shelf to place it on.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the question was really about fan-assisted. Yes, it will impact it very slightly. So you could do 130 fan-assisted, but I actually find 140 fan-assisted doesn't make a lot of difference, to be honest. You might just find that towards the end you want to cover it, but you need at least an hour 40. So I would, if you're doing it 130, I would say, you know, just check it to make sure that when you put a skewer inside, it comes out clean. Remember, you have got some melted almond paste in there, so you might get a little bit of almond paste out, but 140 is round about right. I use the middle shelf, so either top or middle shelf, not the bottom. that tends to be appropriate. I use the middle shelf here today. I find that 140 is pretty much always right. You don't want to overcook it, of course, because you know, fruit cakes, you want them to be lovely and moist. But put a skewer in the centre and that should really come out nice and clean for you. So I want to just thank you all for watching. I hope you make this cake yourself. We will be posting the whole recipe with the instructions on the website anyway, but it's always good to see a demo as well. So enjoy your Easter, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.